Hello, readers and writers. So today we're going to work on raising the level of tension in our story. So I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of sad or scary movies, and there's like one part in the movie that you just cannot seem to forget. I do too. I've watched this movie, Titanic, and I cannot seem to get it out of my head. So even though when people watch this movie, Titanic, everybody knows that the boat is going to sink, but it's so painstakingly horrible to watch. First, it hits the iceberg, then the bottom fills with water, then the next floor up, then the next floor up, after another, and then it tips upward almost in slow motion so that the back end of the boat is straight up in the air. And then finally, the ship and its passengers slide down into the sea. There's something so unbearable about that sequence of events and how it slowly gets worse and worse. So writers today, what I want to do is teach you that when writers set out to draft their stories, they think about the structure of their story, and they make an effort to structure their story not how things may have happened in real life, but they structure it to be a compelling story. Sometimes it's helpful to think about how writers that you personally admire, how they build the tension in their stories little by little. Here's our objective. I will be able to build tension in my story little by little. And our language objective, I will be able to write varying sentence types to speed up or slow down. Excuse me. Okay, so here's the first strategy we want to talk about. You could give your character a time limit. This automatically gives them a pressure, right? They have to reach their goal by a certain time or they fail, right? Plus, it adds a bonus of if you slow them down with obstacles and troubles that you put in their way, then it makes it even more challenging to end the quest. Here's another thing you could do. Try to play with the pacing, how fast or slow the time goes by. Well-written fiction has peaks and valleys to the pacing of a story. Each time your character hits a crisis point, a peak, the pacing speeds up. Once that crisis is solved, the story can take on a more leisurely pace, a valley, giving your character and the reader a brief break. Soon another crisis will present itself, and this one's got to be bigger than the last. The valleys get shorter and the peaks get bigger as the plot speeds up. And finally, the story culminates in your climax. Your reader anticipates these peaks and the tension and is pulled through the story. You can also increase the tension by dialogue. So the way that you can structure a conversation between two characters or even between characters and their own thoughts can effectively elevate the tension. So maybe you have a character that says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I was so late." If you don't want to increase the tension, the second character could say, "Oh, that's fine." Or you could have that second character go, "Really? That was really hurtful. It totally hurt my feelings." And then the first person goes, "Well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Gosh, what do you think I'm doing? I'm trying to be nice," blah, 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 right? So you can elevate the tension in a conversation. So there's two different ways that we can kind of work with our tension. Sometimes you might want to increase the tension over the scope of a whole story, and sometimes you want to elevate the tension just in a scene. So I'm going to show you two examples of that. So here's a great example of building tension throughout the whole story. The Cat in the Hat. Super easy, right? So in this particular book, if you're not familiar with it, these two little kids are home alone. And their mom says, "Don't mess up anything while I'm gone." Well, all of a sudden there's a bump. And that raises the tension. What's the bump? And then this cat just walks right into their house. And that raises the tension. What's he doing here? And then he picks up the goldfish in the goldfish bowl. And that raises the tension because then he holds it up really high on the end of his umbrella, and then he stands on top of a ball holding the fish. And so then he gets more and more things in his hand, and pretty soon he's balancing like 12 things in his hand while standing on a ball. All of this tension is building because everybody knows he's going to come falling down, which he does. And when he falls down, it makes a huge mess, and now we have more tension. And the Cat in the Hat, here's the valley. He says, "Oh, it's fine. I'm going to go out. I'm going to get this thing. It's going to fix it all. Super up," right? So he comes back in, and he has this big red box. And he opens the box, and out comes these two little creatures, a thing one and a thing two. And he says, "These guys are going to clean up the whole mess. It'll be just fine." But of course, thing one and thing two, they don't clean up the mess. In fact, they make it worse. And now mom's new red dress has a stain, and they were flying kites in the house. So picture frames are all around the floor. Everything gets worse and worse and worse. Then somebody sees that mom is coming back home. She's nearly there, and they have this huge disaster of a house. So now they have to clean it up. So you can see what Dr. Seuss did through this whole story. Slowly building the tension. Here we've got this weird person in the house, and then he kind of makes a mess, and then the mess gets worse, and then mom's coming back, and we have to clean it all up. So the whole time they're building tension in that story. Sometimes, however, you can create tension just in a scene. And this is one of my favorite fantasy stories. If you have not read The Princess Bride, you totally should. Anyway, so this girl, Princess Buttercup, she lives on a farm, and this guy in the picture, he's at the beginning, he's just called Farm Boy. And Farm Boy lives to please Buttercup, right? He hasn't said he loves her, but everything he does says he loves her. And the Buttercup, she just kind of ignores him and treats him really badly, to be honest, right? She doesn't acknowledge his feelings. She doesn't even say thank you. But what happens is a very wealthy woman comes to where they live, where Buttercup lives with her parents and Wesley is the farm boy. And the Countess is very beautiful and very rich. And she kind of keeps looking at the farm boy, the Countess does. And after she leaves, Buttercup that evening has a bad reaction to this. So I'll read from the book, and it says, "That night, Buttercup went up to her room, and she lay on her bed, and she closed her eyes, and she imagined that the Countess was staring at Wesley, the farm boy. Buttercup got up from the bed. She took off her clothes, she washed a little, she got into her nightgown, she slipped between the sheets and snuggled down and closed her eyes. And the Countess was still staring at Wesley. Buttercup threw back the sheets, opened her door. She went to the sink by the stove and poured herself a cup of water. She drank it down. She poured another cup and rolled its coolness across her forehead. The feverish feeling was still there. How feverish? She felt fine. She was 17 and not even a cavity. She dumped the water firmly into the sink, turned, marched back into her room, shut the door tight, went back to bed. She closed her eyes. The Countess would not stop staring at Wesley. Uh-oh, Buttercup gasped. Oh, dear. Now the farm boy was staring back at the Countess. So I don't know if you could kind of see what happened in that scene, but first they want you to notice that she is feeling distracted. But then she can't really sleep. She keeps imagining the Countess staring at Wesley, the farm boy. So she's distracted, then she can't sleep. Now she's actually feverish, right? Rolling a glass of water across her forehead. Then her fears really take over her imagination, right? And then now her fear goes to now farm boy Wesley is staring back at the Countess, right? So it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And finally what happens in the story, she actually gets out of bed before dawn to go down to Wesley's cabin and tell him she loves him. Great way to build tension in a scene. Here's what a story map could look like to raise the tension. So you have your exposition at the beginning talking about the setting and the character, and then you have your inciting incident, which is going to kick off the tension. And then we just keep going and going, adding to the problem and making it worse, increasing the tension until we get to the climax of the story. Okay, so let's apply this to your story. Think about your story, especially the so part, the quest. What could you do to raise the tension little by little? Remember, you always want to make some room for the problem to get worse. Make sure that that first problem that your hero encounters isn't so bad that you can't make it worse. You want to leave room for worse. All right, so to review, raising the tension. Give your character a time limit. Play with the pacing. You might even want to look at the dialogue and how those words or how your sentence stems, your sentence structure works. For example, in a lot of tense, action-y type scenes, you can tell that the sentences get really choppy. And like here's a little bit from The Princess Bride right after Buttercup goes down to tell Wesley that she loves him. So she goes down and she says, "I love you," Buttercup said. "I know this must come as something of a surprise since all I've ever done is scorn you and degrade you and taunt you, but I've loved you for several hours now and every second more." And she goes on for this whole monologue. And then it says, "Dear Wesley, sweet, perfect Wesley, whisper that I have a chance to win your love." And with that, she dared the bravest thing she had ever done. She looked right into his eyes. He closed the door in her face. Without a word, Buttercup ran. She whirled and burst away, and the tears came bitterly. She couldn't see. She stumbled. She slammed into a tree trunk, fell, rose, ran on. Her shoulder throbbed from where the tree trunk hit her, and the pain was strong, but not strong enough to ease her shattered heart. Back to her room she fled, back to her pillow. Safe behind the locked door, she drenched the world with tears. So you can kind of hear in my tone and the way that I'm reading it that kind of has more tension. But the way this author structured his sentences also had something to do with it, right? It's like verb, 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 verb. This is what she did, she did, she did, she did. She ran, she whirled, she burst. The tears came bitterly. She couldn't see. She stumbled. She slammed. She fell into a tree trunk, rose, ran on. So kind of take that into consideration when you're building intention in your story. I think it might really, really help. All right. Well, thanks so much, and I hope you have a good time writing today.